The TCG Design Theory podcast is part of the Booster Pack Network. For more TCG-related content, visit theboosterpacknetwork.com. Hosting for this show is sponsored by Category 1 Games, the go-to shop for all of your classic TCG needs. Find your favorites or discover something new at category1games.com.
All right, hey everybody. This is the TCG Design Theory podcast. My name is Jay, and today we're going to be talking about crowdfunding and crowdfunding in general, but more specifically tabletop games, and then maybe we can get into some of the specifics about trading card games. But today I have Anya Combs, who is the tabletop game manager or tabletop account manager at BackerKit. So Anya, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about what your introduction was to the tabletop games world and what your experience is in the industry?
Sure. So my experience as a player in the tabletop space really never expanded amongst tabletop nights with my family. We did a lot of family game nights and things like that, and on long car rides we would play games. But I didn't play any tabletop games from the ages of 12 to I don't even know how old I was. I played Cards Against Humanity, and every now and then I'd play a couple, random board games here and there, but it wasn't really a thing in my life. And I got my first job in the games industry at 25, worked for a number of years at a bunch of different companies, and then found myself at Kickstarter in 2016. And quite honestly, didn't know how big tabletop games were on Kickstarter. And during my time at Kickstarter, I got to see it just continue to grow and really just take over the whole company, which was really cool and interesting. So really it was because of my job at Kickstarter that I have become, I guess, who I am in the tabletop world. My background for games was exclusively digital. So I worked for addictinggames.com, I worked for Nickelodeon, and then I worked at Kickstarter. And I was brought in because of my digital experience. So I very quickly learned the ropes of the tabletop world through Kickstarter. And now I'm at BackerKit doing pretty much exclusively tabletop things, although I just like to say that I work in games because I don't want there to be a misconception that I'm not willing to talk to video games people or anything like that. That is how I got my start, and that is something that is a world that I will always be a part of. I'm actually headed out to a conference in Croatia next week for about a week to talk about a little bit of tabletop game design at a video game specific conference, and just reestablish a lot of those relationships with video games people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know at GDC and things like that. There's been speakers talking about games like Hearthstone, which obviously blend video games and card games into one. And it's always interesting hearing design theory around, kind of having to start with the physical game and playtesting and everything, and then incorporating that into a digital space. But with your, during your time at Kickstarter, what would you say was the biggest, what was bigger? Was it video games or tabletop games in terms of projects that were getting funded and projects that were receiving the most funds, kind of in general?
Yeah, I mean, for my specific time at Kickstarter, it was tabletop games. There was a huge just push around 2014, 2015, partially thanks to Tim Schafer and the Double Fine game that brought in millions of dollars, and then suddenly all these video games people came to Kickstarter. But the marriage between crowdfunding and tabletop games just makes sense, right? It's easier to a certain degree, and I use easier just in the business / fundamental sense, not necessarily in implementation. But I have a card game and I want to come to Kickstarter and fund that card game. Cool. I can do about 6 months of prep to talk to manufacturers and figure out what my fulfillment is going to be, get quotes and things like that, figure out what card stock I want to use, what if I want it to be in print, and all of the different components that go into making the game. come to get a quote and say like, cool, I need, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, whatever it is, come to Kickstarter, and then hopefully fund, or BackerKit, or, other crowdfunding sites, fund. And then I just fulfill for the most part, right? There's obviously like a lot of other elements that kind of go into it. And there's delays and there's shipping issues, and like things happen sort of through the process. But like on paper, it's pretty straightforward. Video games is a totally different beast, where there's development delays, there's interpersonal things that happen, there's tech, right? Like the number of times people have been like, oh, my computer broke and now I can't even like make the game, and I have to now use funds to like buy a new computer, which means I now no longer have the funds, right? So it's the timeline of coming out with a video game is just exponentially different. And so what I saw, at least at my time at Kickstarter, was that was becoming more prevalent of like, cool, all these projects were funding, but it was taking like 5-6 years for those projects to come out, versus tabletop, 6 months, sometimes up to like 2 years is like the most wild sort of version of that. So then the number of tabletop projects increased significantly, because it just became a space for people that made it a little bit more accessible to crowdfund tabletop games. It made more sense, right? It's much more straightforward. That's not to say that it's easy necessarily, and that's not to say that it's like a simple process, but it is definitely a little bit more straightforward than the video game process.
Right. And so speaking on that, you kind of touched on some of these things taking years, or, there being delays. Of course, that's going to happen. That's one of the risks of crowdfunding. But what can creators do to have, what are some of the key things that creators can do to have a successful crowdfunding campaign? And that ranges from things that they can do, prior to launching, or even during the campaign itself.
I think the biggest thing is prepping, right? I mean, a lot of this is like it's like school all over again. So like we need to study, right? You need to study before you take a test. So for crowdfunding, there's a handful of things I see that people do that I'm like, wow, wish we would have chatted, or wish you would have listened to me, right? Which, like, it's up to you if you want to listen. It's all good.
Right. You're the expert. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think sometimes people need to learn by doing, and that's totally valid. I am definitely one of those people that needs to learn by doing. So like, it's all good. So the first thing is having realistic expectations. I've talked to people that are like, I'm going to make millions of dollars on Kickstarter. And I'm like, let's talk about why that is. And let's talk about why making $1 million is important. Is it you need to make $1 million because that's your price point, and you need to make $1 million in order to like ship the number of games and product that you have sort of in bulk? Like what is it about this $1 million mark? And if people say, I just want to make $1 million, I'm like, okay, so you do not have realistic expectations. There is nothing wrong with like wanting to make $1 million and being able to say that I'm $1 million creator on Kickstarter. That's totally valid and fine. But why is sort of the number one question, right? So then the second question I ask is, okay, if that is your metric of success, which everyone has a different metric of success, what are you going to do to make $1 million? And I give people a formula. So if you take your funding goal and you divide that by the base price of the game, whatever that number is how many people need to pledge at that base price level. So if that's 10,000 people, you need to be able to grow a community of roughly 3 times the size of that. So you need to have like 30,000 people, either through a mailing list, your Twitter, whatever it is, right? So the second thing is growing that community. How are you growing the community? How are you like building your newsletters? How are you getting people to sign up for your newsletter? How are you engaging within the games community? Are you in any Discords? Are you going to any events? Are you showing the game off? Do you have a prototype? All of these sort of things to like do the community building aspect of things. That has definitely changed over the years, partially because of COVID and in-person events. Even though they are for the most part back, they're still different. They're still, like I was at PAX East. I'm going to this event in Croatia. I was going to go to E3 before E3 kind of fell apart. But I'm going to Gen Con, I'm going to Essen, I'm going to PAX Unplugged. Like I'm going to a bunch of shows, and they're back almost at full capacity of what they were, but the expenses to go to these things are so much more expensive than they were in the years past, right? Part of that is because some of these conference organizers, like, they need to recoup a loss for the last 2 years. So it's a business, right? Like, at the end of the day, this is all just sort of business related stuff. So if you're not able to go to in-person events, how are you getting the game in front of people? Well, the internet is a great place. There are just how many Discords exist, right? Like, I think I'm in 15 servers right now, and most of them I have muted, but like I'll go in and check every once in a while and be like, oh, this is cool. What are people doing, right? Um, Twitter, I don't know what's going to happen with Twitter, because Twitter is changing so quickly and their algorithm is an absolute disaster. But Twitter is still a great place for people to be able to like talk to each other. It is still like a social media networking platform. Same with Facebook. Facebook has changed so much. And even though Facebook is still like an okay place for people to communicate, Facebook ads still do decently well. Although that has also started to kind of like teeter off a little bit. So people are now going to TikTok. I've seen so much board game content on TikTok, right? It's just going to those social media sites and social media platforms and ways of engaging and getting people excited about your thing. So growing that community is really important. We have something on BackerKit called BackerKit Launch, which is basically a way for you to like build your email list, which is super cool. And people have found that to be incredibly helpful, especially first time creators. For people who have already launched projects, Launch has a really cool feature where they filter out your past backers, and you have the option to sort of like show the project to people who've never backed your project in the past, but for people that have like backed similar projects. So there's a lot of different ways that you can sort of grow a community, but growing that community and getting it pretty sizable before you launch, absolutely key. And the biggest reason for that is, by far and large, the numbers behind first time creators are roughly a 30-70 split. And so what I mean by that is about 30% of your pledges, and this can be 30, 35, 37, whatever, right? But conservatively, about 30% of your pledges are going to come in through Kickstarter, which means you need to bring in about 70% of your pledges from outside sources. So that's newsletters, Facebook, Twitter, wherever your people are, right? You need to be
Right.
able to sort of bring in that 70%. The third thing, which is like a little controversial, but I encourage people not to look at quote failing as a bad thing. And what I mean by that is, if you don't fund your first time around, that actually gives you a ton of information. So if you're not funding for whatever reason, that tells you that maybe you weren't ready for like a handful of different reasons. Most of the time it's because you haven't done the community building part, or you've like relied on, oh, I have access to this newsletter that has like millions of subscribers, and so I'll just like ride the coattails of that. That doesn't really yield a lot of results, right? Like placements in newsletters are really important, right? So like if you're at the bottom of a giant newsletter and like, cool, you got the placement, and nobody's going to see it. So how are you able to get like the game in front of people to get people excited about it? Maybe your goal was too high. Maybe you didn't explain what the game was enough. Maybe you didn't play test it enough. Like, asking people kind of what's going on is like, it's so important to kind of get that feedback from people. So and the number of people that have launched their first time on a crowdfunding platform and then not funded, but then come back and then like absolutely like as their goal has gone through the roof, it's actually a decent amount. I don't know the numbers offhand. I don't have that percentage, but it's like, it's a pretty good number. And there's a lot of good success stories on any crowdfunding site where like their first time was not great, but their second time that they came back, did the work, did the studying, right? They did incredibly well on the platforms.
Mhm. And I think, probably the main thing there, from what I've gathered in my past and things like that, is you want to bring a crowd to crowdfunding. That crowdfunding isn't just this place where people are waiting around for projects to hit. As you said, like 30% of your backers are going to come from the platform itself, just from browsing or seeing those projects. But you need to bring a crowd to crowdfunding. So there's obviously a lot of building that you have to do, whether that's online or in person, before you do these things. Can you maybe talk about something that creators need to do during the campaign to have a successful campaign. Because I've seen campaigns where they bring in a lot of people, and then the creator is just not doing one thing or the other correctly, and the funding starts to lose momentum. So can you cover some of that?
Well, I think the reality here is your funding is going to lose momentum. So if you look at the back end of Kickstarter, there's a lot of information that you can get. So you get a pie chart, and you get a line graph, and that line graph, 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, they all kind of look the same. First 2 days, huge push, plateau, and then the last 2 days is a huge push. And so I think what you're asking about is that middle part, that plateau period. So the first thing is like, you're going to hit a plateau. That's an inevitable thing. You're not just gonna, even projects like an Exploding Kittens or a Frosthaven, they all experienced a plateau of some kind, right? It's a different situation, right? Having no pledges and like, oh, I only had a couple $1,000s come in today is like, it's different, but it's still sort of the same like principle, right? I really like Elon Lee's perspective on crowdfunding. Elon Lee, who is he runs Exploding Kittens. He's got a really good mindset and perspective on how crowdfunding works. But the way that he views it is, you basically have 30 days to host a party. And the first 2 days you want to make sure that you invite everybody to the party before the party happens, so people can RSVP and have it on their calendar.
And mingle, yeah.
And exactly. And so when the party starts, you want it to like go off with a bang and like have it be exciting and engaging and all that good stuff. And you really want to have it be such a good experience that everybody who's at the party wants to invite their friends. Right? So that's the community aspect of it, of like, oh, I backed this thing, you should back it too. It's really cool. So when you hit the plateau period, looking at it from the perspective of like, how is it that I engage with the people who are already here? I think things like social goals are actually really helpful. So like, oh, if we get, X amount of people on Twitter or X amount of people on Facebook or X amount of people on whatever it is, being able to sort of unlock things that are about the campaign. So like maybe it's a new tier, maybe it's a new feature of some kind. It's about creating the excitement and wanting people to just stay. That doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to back, right? Because I think a social goal, which is not monetary, it's just social, it's just numbers on a, faceless corporation site. But being able to unlock that to then get those people to come back to the project. So that way you're looking at it from a long-term perspective of, okay, well, this is all to get to those last like 72 to 48 hours on the platform. That is really more important than focusing on, oh, I'm not getting any backers. I'm not getting any backers. I'm not getting any backers. Or I'm not getting the backers that I want. I'm not making the amount of money that I want. Like, I understand that, but you have to look at this as a long-term thing. Like, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, and I think I was just about to say that because everybody says, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
And that kind of gets into how long you run your campaigns, because
Mhm.
I've seen people say, oh, it's better to do shorter campaigns, it's better to do longer campaigns. Have you seen anything that kind of justifies one or the other when
Yep.
it comes to what's better for tabletop games?
So here's the thing. 30 days, 28 to 30 days. I know people that run 21-day campaigns. Here's the thing that you need to keep in mind and into consideration. The reason we say, all of the crowdfunding experts for the most part will say about 30 days is because you want to hit 2 pay cycles.
Mhm.
So if it, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I've had this discussion so much recently. It's really interesting. Tuesdays and Wednesdays tend to be the best days for crowdfunding. Um, I think this is just like anecdotal. I don't have like anything to back this up. This is just like personal opinion. I think it's because this is a holdover from the days of music and movie releases. Even though movie releases were like usually on like a Friday, right? It's like movie comes out on a Friday, the whole family goes to see a movie, but the trailers usually come out on like Tuesdays and Wednesdays. For music, typically albums would come out for like physical CDs and cassettes. Those would come out on Tuesdays and Wednesdays because it used to be that every other Tuesday is when people would get paid. So I think it's just like a little bit of a holdover from that. I think that's why Tuesdays and Wednesdays tend to be sort of like really, really robust days. But for the time frame of things, right? 30 days is guaranteeing you the option to hit 2 different pay cycles. Now, I understand people saying, "Oh, well, if I do 60 days, then I'm going to hit 4 pay cycles." Here's the thing with that though. When you start to get into 4 pay cycles, other bills come up, other expenses come up. And so what is the thing that someone is going to sort of like push to the side? This bill needs to get paid. Well, this thing is not going to hit my bank account until this, crowdfunding project ends. So I'm going to have to pay my bills before I make sure I back this crowdfunding project, right? So getting it within those 30 days with those 2 pay cycles is absolutely key. You can do that in 21 days, but you just kind of need to like time it out.
Hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because a lot of people are very keen to back something and to get into the project, and then when they do start to realize, like, okay, yeah, my card is going to get charged and things like that, maybe they back out of their pledges. How much of that do you see in terms of drop off when a campaign is about to fund and be successful, and people going like, oh, okay, well, I changed my mind, kind of thing.
Well, there's a fail-safe on Kickstarter. So the last 24 hours of the project, you can't actually back out of the pledge. That way it doesn't like dip below. You can cancel your pledge after and ask for a refund, but when the project is live, there's a little bit of a fail-safe that's built into the system. Honestly, unless there's like a giant controversy of some kind, it's like 3%. It's really, really low. And then even from there, once a project has ended, anyone that cancels, it's a very, very low amount. If there's like a significant number of people that are canceling their pledges once a project has ended, or even during the duration of a campaign, that's something to look into because that means that something's up.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because I know about that from Kickstarter's perspective. Now, in terms of like BackerKit and GameFound and some of those other platforms, do they have something similar or do they approach that differently?
I would assume it's about the same. I mean, on BackerKit, to be totally honest with you, like we're still so new in the crowdfunding space that we just don't have the data to like really see that because we haven't experienced anything to that magnitude yet, right? Like for the most part, all of our projects are funding. We've had maybe 2 or 3 projects that haven't funded on BackerKit, but that's also because we're in open beta or we're in closed beta. And so like we're handpicking everybody who's on the platform currently. Once we're open and out of beta and like everybody can launch projects, that's when we can kind of like see what the data is. But right now, if we were to provide any data, like it's skewed data because we're curating what's happening on the platform. So it's like I I'm personally not comfortable giving any data about BackerKit, at least for now, just because
For sure.
it's like not it's just not accurate. And I think that would be disingenuous to provide numbers for something that like we're being mindful about who is allowed on the platform. So there would have to be so many caveats that go along with that data that it's like it can't just be like numbers on paper.
Right. And so one of the really popular examples that, or I wouldn't say really popular, one of my favorite examples of you know crowdfunding and kind of the stories behind that is with Jamie Stegmaier and all the projects that he's done. So his very first project was viticulture, um, and there's a story about how if they reached a certain stretch goal where he had metal coins put into his game, that they would that he actually would have failed because the cost would have been too high because
Mm,
of the
mhm,
cost to produce the coins and ship them because of the weight increase, and things like that. And those are just, aside from a very successful campaign, um, somewhat simple things that, creators can think about before, building out their campaign and their stretch
mhm.
goals and things like that. So, what are some other easy to avoid but common mistakes that you see that creators make that they should just be aware of?
Well, first of all, stretch goals are not required. Stretch goals were created because Kickstarter creators were making too much money in the tabletop space and they were like, we need to figure out what to do with all this money that we're making. Like that's the reality. There are a number of creators who don't do stretch goals, right? So here's the thing. There is a misconception that if you meet your funding goal and you surpass that funding goal by an exponential amount, that you're just going to like have all this money. every single cent is going to get used. Every single cent is going to get used, because if people are like putting money into a project, it means they expect a thing in return. So all that money is going to get used no matter what. And a lot of this stuff, especially with shipping these days, this is all an estimate. You don't actually know what your prices are going to be until it's time to fulfill the project, right? So stretch goals are, I see stretch goals being used, I would say personally, incorrectly. So I've seen stretch goals be used as a way to like entice people to back the project more. And I think in some cases that makes sense. I think for people who, if we're looking at an Exploding Kittens, or we're looking at a Cephalofair, or we're looking at a Cool Mini or not, or like projects that were to launch on a crowdfunding platform, and you're like, I know this is going to fund no matter what, enticing people through stretch goals for things they know they can do totally makes sense. For like a first time creator or a mid-tier creator where it's like we're still sort of in that space of like we're pretty sure we're going to fund, but like who kind of knows, it's like it's a bit of a gamble. Putting stretch goals on your project before you fund to entice people is, I highly, highly, highly encourage people not to do that, because your focus until you meet that funding goal has to be that funding goal. Putting all of these like cool things for stretch goals and things like that, like that's great. That like if there's a way for you to do that once you've met your funding goal, that's fantastic. Do that. But your focus needs to be on that funding goal and nothing else until you've met that goal. Additionally, having stretch goals that are not realistic and having stretch goals that are just like cash grabs to get money, I think that is also like super dangerous, right? So I've seen some wild stretch goals of like, I will run around a conference floor and take a photo of myself. And like, how is this helping the project, right? Now, if you have a stretch goal that's like, I want to have gold binding on a book, I want to have gold binding on a card, I want to have a hardcover of a book of an RPG supplement that I'm making or something like that because I only have a soft cover. Yes, that is a good stretch goal, right? I want to increase the quality of my paper. I want to be able to provide color ink for some of these images that I have, or I want to be able to hire this artist that I love. I want to be able to hire more writers, things that are going to increase the value of the product that you're making versus this is, if I could do this, this would just be the coolest thing in the world and I would get a bunch of money from it. It's not, it, backers are smart and they can see when something's a cash grab, and they're less enticed to back that if it's a cash grab versus, oh, this is something that's really cool and exciting and makes sense for the project of the idea that this person is making.
Mhm. And so on the topic of stretch goals, some of the examples that I've seen, as you mentioned, are, hey, if we hit this stretch goal, we can have, a thicker card stock,
Mhm.
a better, a better finish on the cards, just higher quality components in general. But I've also seen stretch goals where it's, it's you're getting a benefit to the game, but that benefit comes in the form of additional components. So it's like, hey, if you
Mhm.
hit the stretch goal, we'll add these two cards to the game, or we'll add this to the
Yeah.
game. How has that impacted campaigns, positively or negatively, um, in terms of, okay, well, I'm funding this game. This is the base game, and these stretch goals are adding other pieces to the game, and people thinking, okay, well, are they just not giving me all of the game? Are they just holding bits back, for the purpose of using them as stretch goals?
Well, I think a lot of those would be considered Kickstarter exclusives, and people love that stuff. That's actually like a really, really good thing to put on your project page. Things that are exclusive to the crowdfunding campaign, regardless of platform, people love that because they get to be a part of something that otherwise would not exist, right? So if you're like, I have these two cards that are Kickstarter exclusives that I will only offer as a stretch goal, yes, that is a really, really good thing. I think a lot of it is about messaging. So if there is a piece of the game, whether that's a component, a rule book, a mini, whatever it is, and if it like fundamentally changes the game and you're putting that as a stretch goal, that's probably not going to be received very well. But if it's, hey, I want to make this addition, which is like almost like a mini expansion to the game as a stretch goal, but it doesn't fundamentally change the core of the game. It just enhances it to make it like a little bit more enticing and a little bit more exciting. I think that's fine. Here's the thing too, like you're always going to have somebody that's going to have an opinion, right?
Oh yeah.
And and that's fine, right? Like, that's totally okay. It's the internet, and boy, oh boy, does everyone have an opinion on the internet. I think there's a way to manage that, though, and I think there's a way to engage in discussion. And I have found personally the best way to do that is to ask questions. So if somebody's like, "Well, why isn't this being offered in the core game?" Ask, like, "Why do you want this to be offered in the core game? Why is this like, you've never played the game, so why is this the most important thing? Why do I like, explain to me. I want to know why this is important," and engaging in that discussion, because 9 times out of 10 it's like maybe somebody just doesn't understand. And if you need to kind of explain what your like costs are, like, good, that's fine. Go for it.
Yeah, any opportunity to be transparent for sure. But I like, answering a question with a question. I think that that does kind of open up the conversation even more to have both parties kind of, diving into that conversation of like, if someone asks a question, it's like, okay, well, why do you think this?
Yeah.
Why do you, why did you ask that? Like, is there something that you're seeing that I'm not? Um, but yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. Now, in terms of we've hit kind of the keys to success, some common mistakes people make. We've talked a little bit about stretch goals. Um, in your time in the crowdfunding space, are there any trends that you've seen aside from just the general growing trend of tabletop games? But are there any specific trends that you've seen that have um, kind of provided certain campaigns with more success than others?
My instinct here is to say no, because I think a lot of it is just like the core rules and the core things to kind of stick to, build a community, make a cool game, right? Um, I think limited rewards have become a little bit more commonplace. So like early birds, right? I think that's definitely become a lot more popular. If it makes sense for the campaign, I think again, limited rewards. So like, I only have 100 of these. That's also like really, really cool. That kind of ties back into like the Kickstarter or crowdfunding exclusive that people really like, kind of no matter what. I would say for us on BackerKit, something that we are actively like building out, which is really exciting, is a streaming integration. So we have it set up where if you launch a project on BackerKit, you can basically overlay a stream on the project page anytime you want a stream to happen. So if the project is live and you're like, "Oh, we have, we stream, we are a company that streams," or "We have friends that stream," if that's something that you want to have on the project page and people go to BackerKit and they look at the page itself, like, that's an option, which is really cool. Like, we definitely see the value in streaming and it growing and it being like a huge part of the game space, which it has been for a long time. Obviously with, everybody for lockdown, seeing the increase of streaming was huge. But the thing that I was always sort of fascinated in is I think I think Critical Role gets a lot of credit here, and they should, right? And that was they funded their part of their actual play, which ended up becoming an Amazon series on Kickstarter, which was a wild time to be at Kickstarter for that. But there's been so many other actual plays that have come out, and that has become this really cool creative outlet for people to be able to kind of like jump on stream with a bunch of friends and play D&D in front of people and go, "Oh, we might be able to monetize this," right? That seemed to be a thing that people were like not realizing you could do. It was like, "Oh, only the professionals do that." But like, if it's something that you want to do, go for it. It's accessible. Just go to Twitch. It's not easy to say, but like it is an option. But I think the actual play of people playing these RPGs with like all these different personalities and all these people that have found this like passion, that's been really interesting to see kind of like build up. So we are actively trying to make that a more robust feature on BackerKit, which is really cool. I'm trying to think of anything else I've seen that's a trend. Yeah, I think other than just like exclusives to the project, and streaming to a certain degree, that's all I can think of right now. Although I'm sure at like 2 p.m. I'm going to be like, "Oh yeah, that one thing."
Right, right, right. Yeah. So if you can touch on some of the things that were maybe not there before when tabletop games really started to, grow, and then things that became, somebody tried it and they became more prevalent. One of the things I can think of is like social goals. I didn't
Mhm.
start seeing social goals until, you know, I want to say like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I might be wrong
Mhm.
on that, but is there anything like that that kind of just was tried out and then stuck over the past 5 years that people just kind of incorporate now that someone tried it and it was successful?
I mean, stretch goals.
Yeah, for
Stretch goals
sure,
is a big one. Yeah, I think it may have been Exploding Kittens were the people that like really built social goals into like how prevalent they are now. I think that was them. I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain that was them. Uh Ooh, that's a good question. That's kind of a hard one to answer. I mean, I think the upgrading of product is a big one, right? So like how do I increase just the actual like quality as a stretch goal? I think that has become a little bit more prevalent now too. The Kickstarter exclusives has been I don't know who the first person was to do that, but
for
I
sure.
mean that has become like incredibly commonplace now. Honestly, anything that's outside of just the basics of crowdfunding is just somebody tried something and it like hit,
For sure.
right? Like we at my time at Kickstarter, we weren't necessarily like feeding creators ideas. They were sort of coming up with things and the community was like, "Oh, that's cool. We want to try that." So everything for the most part has been sort of like creator based and creator worked through, which has been kind of fun to see.
For sure. Now, I know that with traditional tabletop games, you're selling a um, a game, and whether there may be additions and things like that, you're selling a core experience, and then there may be expansions or additions down the road and things like that. But with trading card games, I know that the expectation from the beginning is okay. Um, you know, this is the base set, this is the first release, but naturally with what we're doing here, you expect there to be releases, moving forward and things like that. Um, in your experience, is there anything that you've seen that is a difference between trading card game campaigns and regular tabletop game campaigns that kind of sets those two apart in terms of what makes them successful?
Ooh. To be honest, I haven't seen too many trading card campaigns. I haven't worked on a lot of those. I would say probably not. I mean, I think the component side of it obviously is a little bit different. Like if we're talking about like a massive Euro game that has like a billion minis, that's just going to be a little bit of a different experience. I guess I can answer that based on like I don't want to I don't want to I feel like this diminishes trading card game and this is not how I mean it, but I'm thinking just like a traditional party game that's like cards, right? Um I think offering exclusives to the again, I'm going to say the same thing over and over again, but I think offering exclusives to the campaign is a really really smart thing to do. And I think if you have a pack of like 100 cards, instead of offering like 100 more cards, like I think that's where people will be like, "Wait, you're just taking away from the game." But if you had like 5 cards that were an exclusive that had like gold binding and were like flashy colors. Binding of Isaac did this. They did a really good job of sort of offering like Kickstarter exclusives on their project, and that is a card game. That is a very traditional, straightforward card game. Um, I think that is like super super beneficial. To the other side of that, for something like a big minis game, offering maybe like one additional mini versus like five if you're like there's 10 minis in the game, right? Like so you're offering a 50% increase in value to something that already exists. Like that's going to fundamentally change the game versus like maybe one two at the most, right? What is it that you're offering that doesn't change the core game itself?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's interesting because even talking about games that are not um, by their nature collectible, um, giving those Kickstarter exclusives and those variations on the product does make that version of the game, collectible. It's like, hey, I backed this on Kickstarter or another platform. I got this special card or this specific thing, and it does become like a collector's item.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure if there was anything in the trading card game area. I know you said you don't have a lot of experience with it, that maybe capitalized on that because there are games like Grand Archive and games like Sorcery, Contested Realm, um, that obviously all these campaigns have their Kickstarter exclusives and things like that. And when people are already jumping into a project expecting, okay, this is a game built around collectability, having those additional collectible things, you know, is kind of an interesting thing to think about. Um, and I'm not sure if maybe that is beneficial to the campaigns, or if it's just like, oh, well, they're just, you know, making a bunch of, they're just adding more collectability to the game and making things more rare or whatever. So I don't know if you saw any examples like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of brings up a different discussion, which is like, when is it time to make an expansion? I think that to me, I feel like that would be sort of a 1-to-1 ratio if we're talking about just like a hard, straightforward game. Um, and for like a collectible game, I mean, I guess to a certain degree, you could argue that any game, any tabletop game on a crowdfunding platform could just be a collectible game, right? Like there's projects that are like, you can only get this entire project on Kickstarter, right? There's like a handful of projects like that where it's like, we're only offering this on Kickstarter, and we're never going to offer it. It's not going to retail. We're not going to sell it in our store, right? Like that is effectively a collectible. But I think really what it comes down to is the exclusivity of these things. I think that's kind of like the heart of what this discussion is. So whether that's like a card, a pack of cards, a whole game, a mini, some sort of special component of some kind, if it's an exclusive just to that specific crowdfunding platform, I think that is where people get really excited.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'll bring up an example of, I think they may still be on their campaign, but Doomlings.
Mhm.
They had
Yeah.
a very successful, first campaign, and then this one that they're bringing in now is obviously an expansion to the game, but it's like a random expansion. It's like you buy this, and it's like booster packs for like just a regular board game or a card game, where it's like, yeah, you can get these random hollow rare, whatever cards to add to your game that multiple people can play. And it's kind of interesting to see how that, aspect of what people enjoy so much about trading card games, and what people they tend to stay away from trading card games because they only want, the experience in the box. This is all I need to play the game. And then kind of combining those two things is the first example that I've seen of it being done. Do you see more examples of that being done moving forward? Because their campaign at this point, I mean, I think is definitely going to fund, and it seems pretty popular.
Yeah, Binding of Isaac did that. They
Okay.
actually, it's funny. So Binding of Isaac kickstarted an entire expansion that was more successful than the first Binding of Isaac. And they had a whole bunch of exclusive content that was associated with that campaign. But yeah, that is a super common practice, just that exclusivity like aspect of it, of like, yep, this is just for this, and we're super excited to have it being offered in the campaign. That is definitely much more commonplace than it was even like 5 years ago. I think 5 years ago we were still in the space of like, I just need to fund the project, and like it'd be cool if that could happen. And obviously crowdfunding has evolved and changed so much. Every year there's something new and different. I think also there's like a level of so many of these games go to retail, and I think people are like, I'll just get it in retail, right? Like maybe I can get it at a discounted price at like Target or something. And so I think that makes things a little bit more difficult for creators to offer something to be able to back the crowdfunding project. So offering exclusives sort of helps negate that perspective. And a lot of this is like semantics and just like messaging. So Kickstarter exclusive versus backer only. Backer only is so much more enticing than like Kickstarter exclusive. It's really interesting. There is also like a whole sub community on like eBay of people that just like sell Kickstarter exclusives on eBay.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's so wild to me. Like I can't believe that we're living in this timeline.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah, if you look at card prices and things like that for, games like MetaZoo, you'll
Mhm.
see that, some of their more recent boxes, or even their original boxes that were printed after the Kickstarter exclusive boxes, are normal pricing, and then you see the Kickstarter exclusive booster box or whatever, and it's it's just a ridiculous price. So with the success of Kickstarter, we have a lot of other platforms that are popping up, a lot of other things that are, kind of participating in the crowdfunding kind of business model. And so the ones that I know about are Kickstarter, GameFound, and BackerKit as the primary three for me. And there are probably more.
Yeah.
But can you go into maybe what sets apart some of these other crowdfunding platforms from Kickstarter, and maybe specifically what BackerKit is doing that you know is what they're doing to be different in terms of bringing benefits to creators in terms of crowdfunding.
Yeah, I mean, I it's interesting. Like, I have such a different perspective on this, I think, than I don't want to say everybody, because I don't think that's accurate. But having worked at Kickstarter, I was there for like almost 6.5 years, and I saw a lot and I learned a lot. Um, I am deeply familiar with Kickstarter. Granted, it's been a year since I've left, and there's been a lot of changes over there. But I think the biggest difference, so Kickstarter is for all types of creators, right? So tabletop games specifically is still just like absolutely marquee over there, but there's also design and technology, there's comics, there's actually like a really robust comics community over there. The sort of like competitor to that is Indiegogo. There's a huge community on Indiegogo. There's arts, all types of art. They just hired a new director of arts, the former head of arts over there, Patton. It has been in the art world forever. She's great. She's a really incredible human. So like art is something that they're very deep want to be very I should say involved in. And there's 15 other categories, so Kickstarter is sort of holistic in that sense. The challenges with that is they need to make sure that all of their decisions that happen from a product level are for all creators. So for example, there's some categories on Kickstarter where creators don't even have a credit card. So how are they able to bring in backers and creators into the how do they as a creator actually create an account, right? There's country limitations. Kickstarter's not available in every country. That is what you will see across the board, though pretty common with crowdfunding sites. There's very few sites that are like available to everyone. Part of that is just because of payment services. Um, they also, there's a lot of competition on Kickstarter. So you can get buried on Kickstarter depending on so many different factors, right? Um, but they're still the biggest player in the game, and they are probably going to be that for quite some time, right? Um, GameFound, which started as a pledge manager and a creator from Awaken Realms, created a tabletop only crowdfunding site. So they only deal with tabletop. That's it. They don't do video games. They don't do anything else. They're 100% tabletop focused. I think that they are finding their way, but they have carved out a really niche spot for themselves as like, they have a ton of minis projects, and the minis projects that they have are good. They have really good projects on GameFound. But I know that they also recently changed their pricing structure. So they went from a 0% pledge management fee to 5%, which is like pretty standard, quite honestly. 5% is pretty standard. I think it's 5%. Someone feel free to check me on that, but I'm fairly certain it's a 5% fee. And I think that they're huge in Europe. They are like, arguably one of the biggest tabletop, maybe the biggest tabletop other than Kickstarter, crowdfunding options for European creators. They're very heavily EU based. Um, Indiegogo has some crowdfunding. They do a little bit. It's not as robust as everyone else, but they're still there. They're decent in comics. I think comics is really design technology. Comics seems to be like their big thing. For games, a little bit, not a huge amount. Although I did see that Banana Chan launched an Indiegogo project, so we'll see. For BackerKit, we're still in closed beta. We're still in the process of like hand curating and hand picking who's on the site for a handful of different reasons. it's pretty easy to get approved, to be totally honest with you. But we want to be as like hands-on as possible, at least for now. Um, our pricing structure is a little bit different too, where we're sort of rolling crowdfunding and pledge management into one, so that all of that is just one flat fee that you can use the platform for, which is like kind of cool. And we do have like, I biased opinion here, but like we do have one of the best pledge managers out there. We've worked really hard to build this pledge manager. It's 10 years of worth of work built into this pledge manager, and it's good and it works, and it's for the most part, it fulfills the needs of every single creator. We kind of view crowdfunding more from the perspective of like, this is all just very much community based. So we're trying to build as many like community tools and aspects onto the platform. So we have a section for polls, which is really cool. So people can like have polls on their crowdfunding site. We're trying to make this as like user friendly. So like you can do a lot of editing on the back end, which is pretty cool. Right now we're obviously like very heavily skewed towards tabletop, but like we're truly open to everyone. Iron Spike has launched, I think, 2 projects on the platform. They are arguably one of the biggest comics creators out there. So like we are in the process of working and figuring it out, but we welcome and want as much feedback from people to like continue to build what we're building, because we're in the building phase. This is kind of the most exciting part, because we're like, cool, we can make mistakes and it's not going to have dire consequences.
Yeah, for sure.
But like, I think the most exciting part now for creators is that they get to have the experience that they want out of a crowdfunding platform, right? So like some projects that maybe people want to launch on BackerKit don't make sense. So it does make sense for them to go to GameFound. It does make sense for them to go to Kickstarter. Some projects that people want to launch on Kickstarter, it doesn't make sense to go to Kickstarter. Go to GameFound, come to BackerKit. Some projects that people want to launch on GameFound don't make, right? Like people get to pick and choose, because if somebody is going to force you to stay exclusively with them for the foreseeable future, like I don't think that's healthy, and I don't think that's good for the creator community. So we've sort of built a thing that like we'd love to have every project on our platform. Like
For sure.
I think that is obvious, right? But we also totally understand that it's like, if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. Like that's cool. So like go pick and choose. That's such a like it's such a great time for creators to be able to pick and choose where they want to go right now.
hmm Yeah, and I think the fact that BackerKit obviously started as a pledge manager, and just how important and crucial pledge managers are to, um, you know, kind of getting all that information at the end of a campaign. Um, I don't know the numbers on this, but I know that it is a pretty substantial amount um, of additions and extra money coming in after the campaign is over. When the campaign ends, people wanting to late pledge or back after, the fear of missing out. And, they're like, oh
The
man, I should have
FOMO,
done
yeah.
this. Yeah. So, but yeah, I know pledge managers are huge on that. And to now incorporate that in for BackerKit to do that all in one platform, um, I think it's interesting because, like you said, you guys are learning the crowdfunding aspect of things, but the pledge manager stuff you guys got down.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
working on that and having all that in one ecosystem, I think, is very beneficial to creators.
Yeah, I agree. I think it just like totally makes sense for creators. And again, like so much of this is about streamlining. And it just made sense for us to try to streamline, right? Like it's funny too, because I was hired March of 2022, and I joined, and I did not know that BackerKit was launching a crowdfunding platform. So I joined on my first day, and I was like, wait, what are we doing? What's happening? Oh man, this again.
Yeah.
Which is and so they like announced it like very soon after I had joined, and I was like, oh my God, this is gonna look like I was poached or I jumped ship. That was not
Yeah.
the case. Like that was 100% not what happened. I actively sought out a different job just because I was like, after 6 years at any company, I think it's totally normal to be like, what else is out there? And I was like,
Oh, for sure.
I think I've kind of done everything I can at Kickstarter, and I think like it's time for me to go. Also, like I wanted to leave when I was on top. I wanted to leave when I was like at my peak at an employee at that company. And I was like, I have reached everything that I can do here. Doesn't make sense for me to stay because the next like move would possibly be in like a higher leadership role. And like, it's just not my vibe. Like, it's just not for me. It's not something I'm interested in doing. So I was like, cool, fun new challenges. I'll take on this role of something that I've never done before. Oh, I'm doing the same stuff. Okay, cool. But like, I've learned so much. It's just been like nothing but short of a learning experience, which has been super cool. And like, I'm super grateful for that. But I just always have to laugh where I'm like, God, this just like looks like a certain way, but that is not what happened.
Right. Well, it is different, right? Because, it's a ground up kind of thing. When you were with Kickstarter, Kickstarter was very much established and a place to go and things like that. But getting in at the literal ground floor, as you said, of the crowdfunding platform and how that builds and getting to be a part of the decisions that are made and all that, it's the same. But I also think it's like very different. There's plenty of
very
challenges.
different. Yeah. I mean, the core of crowdfunding, regardless of platform, is going to stay the same. Like, you can only iterate so much on like the core of what
For sure.
crowdfunding is. But how you implement that is really where the like exciting stuff happens. And so being able to have a bit of a front seat or really a back seat to kind of all that has been like super cool for me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's pretty much all I've got in terms of, crowdfunding and what makes people successful and all those things. Is there any other advice, just real quick advice that you'd want to give anybody who is thinking about crowdfunding their game?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, don't be scared to reach out. I'm happy to talk to folks. My Twitter DMs are open. You can email me. My Twitter is at ANYAYNA. You can email me, Anya at BackerKit.com. Super happy to chat with folks. Like, we're here as resources. We're here to help. So no worries. Reach out. It's all good.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's very important is for people to realize that part of being successful on crowdfunding or even with your manufacturing is to be working with someone at that company that understands your needs and is able to, kind of point you in the right direction. So, but Anya, thank you so much for being on the show. This was very
Thanks for
helpful.
having me.
I've heard so many, tips and tricks and things like that about how to be successful on Kickstarter and how to be successful with crowdfunding. But there's always a different perspective on how to do these things properly and how to approach it. So I appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was super cool. I appreciate it.
All right, so that was Anya Combs, who's the Tabletop Account Manager over at BackerKit. And if you have a game that you plan on crowdfunding, whether it's now or maybe sometime down the road, I highly recommend reaching out to Anya and talking about all the things that you can do to try to make that crowdfunding campaign successful. But if you're not quite there yet, if you're still working on your design and looking for maybe a little bit of inspiration, there's no better place to go to than category1games.com. They have a collection of collectible and trading card games that spans the past 30 years. And so anything that you could be looking for, they probably have, from the Battlestar Galactica trading card game to the Conan collectible card game. And there's just all sorts of things on there that would be awesome to just kind of get your hands on and play and learn from so that you can, make better design decisions based off of what has come before. And if you want to reach out to me specifically, my email is j@theboosterpacknetwork.com. You can also find us at our social media handles, which is at TBPN Content. And you can, of course, join us on Discord, where we talk about game design and other things on there. So aside from that, I just want to say thanks again for listening to the episode, and we'll see you next time.